electric motorcycles of the future, right? Actually, that's probably now looking a little bit more dubious. So I've been looking at the trend of electric motorcycles sold in the United Kingdom, and it seems to be declining year on year on year. So we all know that electric bikes aren't that common on the road. If you go out for a ride for 30 minutes or so, you're not going to see any electric bikes. If you go out for a drive in your car, you will see 2 or 3 Teslas, a few small electric cars. You'll see them about the place. Probably about 10% of cars, anecdotally I would say, are electric. With bikes, you hardly ever see them. Now, we all know the hang-ups, don't we? They're heavy, they're furiously overpriced, or let's not say they're overpriced because they've got tech in them, but let's say they're expensive, and they also have that age-old problem of range. We don't know when they're going to run out. Often the quoted range is very different to the real-life range, and you don't know where you're going to be able to charge it. Now, the government's doing its bit to coerce the buying public into electric. Electric's the future, etc. And they're also trying to manipulate the market by incentivizing and fining automotive manufacturers if they don't meet a certain quota of EVs sold, and that quota actually increases every year all the way up to 2030. Let's look at an array of different models from different manufacturers, and let's see what's going on. So let's look at an urban scooter like the Silence SO1, kind of a cool neo-retro design, and we can see that from their point of view they started selling in 2021, seemed to take off, and then they had a strong Q2 in 22, but ever since that peak of 43 units sold, it's actually decreased and almost flatlined since then. Let's take something a little bit different like BMW. Now this is the BMW's large scooter. It's a very futuristic, kind of very tech heavy vehicle. It's actually a heavy vehicle as well. The BMW have that brand loyalty. They've got customers coming into dealerships they can potentially convert over to electric through good sales process. Even BMW peaked in 2022, declined in the second quarter, and really they had a little bit of a dead cat bounce in 2023 for the new registration. Looks like they sold 34 units, and then it declined to 25, but the peak was lower than the 2022 peak. If we look at something with a little bit more of history going back to 2019, the V-Moto TC Max, which is a 125 equivalent, again neo-retro, kind of an urban bike, 60-mile range for the Max, so it's not a lot, 60 miles an hour top speed as well. But we can see a gradual increase of bikes. Going into 2022, for the third quarter, they had their absolute peak of sales, and you can see that with urban commuters they're not so reliant on that March peak for the new registration because people buy them all year round. They're also a lower price point, so it doesn't really matter if you have the new registration on them as much as it does some of the more expensive vehicles. But then the V-Moto then crashes, and coming into 23, sales have been pretty horrible for V-Moto. Let's look at Maving. Maving is a bike I've actually ridden myself, the Maving RM1, 45 mile an hour top speed, single or twin battery variant, 4 kilowatt Bosch hub motor at the rear, and it can go about 80 miles if you've got 2 batteries configured with the bike. So Maving have done really well. They shot up in 2022 to 107 units sold, but then in 2023 again we had a decline, and we haven't quite recovered. I would argue that Maving are a little bit of an exception because their bikes are extremely stylish, extremely well finished. They're handcrafted by ex-Triumph engineers, and really you're buying it not because it's electric, you're almost buying it despite it being electric. You're buying a Maving because it's a Maving, not necessarily because of what engine it runs. I think people who do an urban commute and they have a little bit of money to spare, they want to buy a Maving because it looks cool. It sort of separates them from the crowd. Now, Maving have taken on the feedback that their bike was too slow at 45 miles an hour, so they've released another variant called the RM1S, which is a little bit more expensive. It's gone up from 6 grand to 7.5. Let's see if sales of the RM1S continue, because we all know as electric bikes get more expensive, it becomes a lot harder to get people on board with them. Right, I want to finish this section on a success story. Let's look at Suron. And Suron are kind of a brand that outputs trail bikes combined with mountain bikes, 80 kilos, 40 kilos. They're not really traditional motorcycles in that you can't put a pillion on them, you can't put luggage on them, you can't ride for hundreds of miles on a single charge or tank of fuel. However, Suron are actually looking like a success story because they've had almost exponential growth coming from 2019 up into 2021, stagnant through the pandemic, which perhaps is expected. Maybe they had shipping problems or the like. And as we come into 2023, 192 motorcycles from Suron registered. So interesting with Suron. They're actually a success story, but again, they don't really fit the narrative of a conversion from a petrol motorcycle to an electric motorcycle. It's more of a fancy toy, a very, very fast mountain bike essentially that you can rip around on. And I think if I was an investor, I definitely want to be invested in Suron compared to the other brands that are in decline. Right, let's move on to motorcycles which are actually like for like, that are trying to compete with petrol motorcycles on a similar basis. I'm going to highlight two brands, Energica, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's basically the Italian electric motorcycle brand, very high end, very expensive. We're talking 30 grand for the adventure bike, 25 grand for the sports bike, handmade in Italy. And they're essentially the Ducati of electric motorcycles. Then we've got Zero, which are a little bit more mainstream. Zero do also offer a range of power outputs, whereas the Energica are kind of a very, very powerful, full functioning, high tech. So let's look at Zero first. Because they are more expensive, you're seeing these peaks at every new registration. But if you were looking at this like it was a financial chart, you would see that each peak is lower than the last. So you're seeing a decline in the number of top sales each year from 72, 67, 63. And then last year we just crashed hopelessly down to 27. So it looks like last year was a general poor performer for electric motorcycles. If you were to strip out the lower output bikes from the Zero chart, you'd see that this line basically cuts in half. It's 50% of where it was, and it's also a little bit flatter. And the reason for that is that less people are investing or making the big financial decision to go for a equivalent to petrol style EV. Right, let's have a look at probably one of the worst charts, which is the Energica. And then we see in Q1 2021, we started a nice increase, and they were probably quite happy with these sales at this time because they were going 3, 5, 10, and it almost could have increased exponentially from there. But they had a dip in winter, of course, everybody has that, and then 15 was a peak in Q2 of 22. And unfortunately, we then decreased from there, and we flatlined all through the rest of 22 and through 23. We haven't recovered. And so looking at that chart, basically they are an investor's nightmare. Nobody's buying those bikes in the UK. They might be selling them on the continent, they might be selling them in other markets, but the UK looks like a disaster for those electric motorcycle brands. We'll have a look, we'll see how the new electric bikes with increased energy density, when they come onto the market, we'll see if they sell, we'll see if prices come down. But at the moment, it's quite a grim picture for EVs. I certainly wouldn't invest in one because you can't be guaranteed that you're going to be able to sell the bike. With so few units sold, there's not a market, a buoyant market of buyers and sellers in the second-hand marketplace. So you're going to get a crippling depreciation on your bike if you try and sell it second-hand. And even the new bikes, which are on Auto Trader and eBay, have normally got £5,000 or £7,000 discounted from them. So it's a difficult picture financially for EV manufacturers and owners. Again, I'm going to segment it from cars. I think cars is a different proposition. There's probably an older demographic in motorcycles who are more resistant to EV technology, but basically the numbers don't lie. It's looking like a bit of a disaster. All right, guys, well, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.